a woman who needs no introduction, but I'm going to give her a brief one anyway. Steph Hannon is here tonight, and she's developed tech solutions for Google, for Facebook, and for Hillary Clinton. As part of the Vivid Sydney 2018 program, our discussion tonight is going to delve into technology's potential to tackle global social problems and shape an inclusive future. It will also uncover the people and the powers that are a part of pushing this innovation. From changing preparation and response to natural disasters, to harnessing data to help cities make evidence-based solutions, Stephanie is driven by building innovative products to support and engage communities. Now CPO of Strava, she's inspiring athletes all over the world to unlock their potential by creating a social network united by the spirit of sport. Please join with me in giving a big Sydney welcome to Stephanie Hannon.
Good evening. I am so honored to be here. I'm so proud of the people in the room who braved rain and all the beautiful, amazing things happening out there in the harbor to spend this time together. And thank you to everyone on the live cast. I couldn't be more honored that you're interested in this story and this dialogue. I always start any presentation when I'm in Australia by saying Sydney is the best city in the whole world. And you can go fact check, like there's no other city where I've ever said that, and I've given talks in, I'm gonna guess 50 countries. And I first came to Sydney in 2000 for the Sydney Olympics. One of my best friends was on the US synchronized swimming team. From the moment I landed till the moment I left, like 3 weeks later, every corner, every train, every place I went, there was like a human being from Australia welcoming me, helping me get around, just navigating the city, and it was magical. And I think that's when my love of Sydney started, and I loved it so much that I moved here in 2008 to build this. Who knows what this is? What is it? It's Google Wave. Thank you, Julie. I have a plant in the audience for any questions. Yes. In the Google Sydney office, which is the sort of home of Google Maps, if you guys didn't know that, Google Maps was created by two Danish brothers named Lars and Jens Rasmussen. They were based in Sydney. Google acquired their company in 2004. That's the origin of Google Maps. Many years later, they wanted to create a new concept around an online collaboration and messaging tool. We built that whole team here in Sydney. From 2008 to 2011, I lived here. It was launched. OK, who's heard of Google Wave, really? Oh, see? OK, all right. That makes me feel good. I like to call it, you can just tweet this, early Slack. Who's with me? Thank you, Julie. It was a concept of channels, live concurrent editing, collaboration in a browser with hundreds of people. And it was a great idea. And we launched it on stage at Google I/O in 2009. This is Lars Rasmussen on the left. And it was sort of a big moment in my life and one of the proudest kind of technology products I've been involved in. And it all happened here in Sydney. So that's part of my attachment. I've worked at a bunch of places. I've gone to a bunch of schools. I just put that up here because in the Q&A, I'm happy to talk about any and all of the above. The talk tonight is really about technology for social good. And in my career, when I felt most motivated and proud is when the technology I was building had impact on how people move around cities or help people be healthy or try to win an election or just bringing Google Maps to a place where Google Maps didn't exist before. And so I'm just going to give a little survey of some of those moments in my career where I was really proud and built something that felt technology innovative and high impact. And then with Holly, we can dig into lots of those pieces. I like to put this up and just say, Hillary's my best friend. If you tweet that, I'm not sure she'll confirm. But I was her CTO, and people often ask, what does that mean? What did you do, and did she actually spend time with you? And the answer is yes. She was very interested in the technology aspects of the campaign, and I'll get a little bit more into what being her CTO does. But who doesn't love pictures of Hillary? So this talk is really broken into 3 sections. First, some of my stories from Google and what I did at Google. Then talking about the campaign and how technology was used to activate people in the campaign. And finally, about Strava, which is my current company, and how we use data from athletes moving about the world to help with city planning. Are you in? Yes. OK, good. You guys, it's 2 a.m. my time. So we're in this together. There's going to be a lot of hand waving. People always tell me I move my hands too much during talks, so get ready. I told Holly we were going to do calisthenics. That's coming. So inside of Google, which is an amazing company, I primarily worked on Google Maps, Google Wave, and Gmail. But I always tried to figure out if there's ways technology can have impact on social good or philanthropic causes. My first example of that, I was the product manager for Gmail in 2004. We launched Gmail in 2004, and I noticed pretty quickly that a lot of email was getting forwarded from universities, because we gave away a gig for free, and that's back when email inboxes, for the young people in here, if you can believe it, were being held to 10 meg. And most people spent their days just trying to navigate deleting attachments and photos so they could keep their inbox small. Just be grateful you don't know that world. I like to say Gmail launching with a gig lifted up the whole industry because other competitive products had to let go of storage as, a constrained resource at that point. But when I saw all of the emails being forwarded in from universities, I said we should be able to host email for universities for free. And we can do it at a fraction of the cost of the servers and infrastructures that they have on site. And that was the beginning of what's now known as Google Apps. And I live in the Bay Area, so I went to the Stanfords and the Berkeleys and said, please let Google host your email. And in 2004, they were like, no, that doesn't seem like a good idea. And so the only university I got to fall was San Jose City College, a small public university about 30 miles south of Mountain View, where Google was headquartered. And so we built what is the first administrative panel that let us host email for a domain other than gmail.com. And hopefully you know the trajectory of that story, that we did it first for universities and then nonprofits and then small businesses, and now it's a big enterprise offering for Google. But the origin of it was really how do we give nonprofits and education institutions access to the same tools that a business could buy, and I was really proud of that. This, if you can believe it, is an early version of Google Transit. In 2006, when I worked in Google Switzerland, Google Maps didn't have transit directions. At best, we had little icons on the map where there were transit stops, but you couldn't route. And there was a small team of us who really wanted transit to be a first-order function inside of Google Maps. Google's headquartered in Mountain View. You might not be surprised to hear we don't have a lot of public transit options there. But Google's first European office was in Zurich. Public transit was the way we all got around. And so we started a 20% project to build what's now known as Google Transit. It launched as its own property. So the merging of Google Maps and Google Transit came much later. And a lot of my job there was to try to go get transit agencies to be willing to publish their data, because transit schedules can be tricky. There's sometimes fixed times, sometimes ad hoc times, location of stations, frequency of trains. There's a lot of information to share. And we launched as part of this, I didn't put in that slide. We launched as part of this a public data standard called General Transit Feed Specification. There's a test later, GTFS. Has anyone ever used that in their professional life? Yeah. Why? What'd you do? Okay, for the people at home, he said he was exploring real-time transit data. I support you. You're currently my favorite person in the audience. Not that there's, Julie, you were first. You might be later. Thank you, I'm glad you used it. But to me, what's special about it is creating open data standards like this and getting organizations globally to publish data in that format meant lots of innovation could happen. So if you go to that Google Play Store or the iTunes Store, you can now see hundreds and hundreds of transit routing apps. You're not locked into one choice because it's open data. So that is another thing I was really proud of. Oh, I can see the countdown now. I think the lesson is speed up. Disaster response is a really important part of Google. If you, in 2011, when the tsunami was coming from Japan towards Hawaii, had typed tsunami into Google Maps, you were probably looking for information about a response, danger, where the tsunami is coming from, anything that could help you take care of your family or know how your family was doing. In the early days of Google, this is the answer we would have given. So we would have answered businesses named tsunami in a geography. Yeah, it's a terrible answer. And so what the disaster response team at Google did is really say, what is the right set of information that real-time you need to know if you're doing a query like this? And how can we answer it real-time with the best of our information? And this led to one of the first, Google.com is like a precious real estate. There's only ever been like 12 words on that page, until for reasons of disaster response, we started putting these messages on the bottom of the screen. And this was really an effort to say, what's the exact information you need at this moment to help in the time of a natural disaster? And from this, it led to creation of maps like this. I just am trying to overwhelm you with color. I hope it's working. This is during the Sandy superstorm in New York City. And you can see this is a useful map because you can see things like where there's water, where there's roads, where there's gas, where there's shelter. And this is the type of technology problem that Google disaster response team worked on. And a lot of it is how do you get that accurate information? Because it's disparate and it's in many response agencies. It's hard to find. So it's just another example of using technology for good. And from helping after disaster response, we moved into public alerts and how can we tell people before a disaster happens. So these are some early Google Now cards. Okay, let's be honest. Who is an Android user in here? iPhone? Oh boy. For the people at home, that's at least 2/3 iPhone and something else. Any like BlackBerry, residual? Okay. Nobody's going to admit it. For people who are primary Android user, they'll be familiar with these cards that kind of try to warn you about information that's useful to you. Again, a kind of technology for good part of Google. This is me in Kenya. We built Google Maps with data we could acquire as much as possible, but there's a point at which there was no good mapping data available for parts of Africa, for India, for the Middle East. And so we built a tool where you could hand trace satellite imagery and use disparate data sources to create maps where there had never been maps. We built this thing in Kenya where we had teams of people building maps nonstop, and that's how we launched India, a lot of the Middle East, Africa, Afghanistan. And it's just really powerful if you can bring that kind of technology to a country that has never seen an online map of their data before, and they can start to layer on transit information, pollution, crime, education, demographics. They can start to manipulate and do planning in a way that has never been possible. And so that, for me, was really powerful. This is me with General Petraeus and Megan Smith, who on the right, she was the CTO of the United States under Obama. We did a trip to Afghanistan as part of Google.org to try to figure out how we could build services that would help that country, help the people of that country. And I taught all the staff in the mayor's office in Kabul how to create maps, and that was pretty special. So all of that. Oh, there's more. Elections. We did a lot of elections work at Google. Elections, transparency in elections. This is my summary. There's a lot of places in the world, different than Australia and the United States, where there's not transparency in elections, and we worked really hard at Google.org to try to bring transparency where there hadn't been transparency before. It's really important. I think it's part of this work I did at Google that is how the Hillary campaign found me, because I was running all of the Google elections and civic engagement work. Okay, that's leading in. I've learned something about my timeliness, Alex. It's not good. I hope there's no bell. That's sort of a body of work at Google that I felt really proud of and felt like technology for impact. And so when I was approached in early 2015, so the US presidential cycle starts very early. So this campaign lifted up almost 2 years before the November 2016 election. And I was approached about taking on the CTO role for Hillary. And to be honest, I didn't really know what that meant. Like, the concept of engineers and innovation inside of a political campaign is really new. But to me, it felt like a big deal, a big moment in our history, a big deal to put the first woman in the White House, a big deal to be the first woman CTO. And so I left the very comfortable, resource-rich Google and went to the place in Brooklyn where we ran the campaign, where we didn't even have chairs. Every Monday was like a land grab, and we all put duct tape on our chair, because every Monday morning, like 40 or 50 people started, and you had to hold onto your chairs. We didn't have pencils. I had free food at Google for almost 10 years. The campaign, no water. We had an ice machine with mold. It was bad times. So most resourced company in the world to like the most scrappy entrepreneurial environment in the world. But I like to say, I think the tech team at Hillary Clinton was one of the most or biggest entrepreneurial efforts of 2016, because I hired 80 engineers, we built more than 55 products, and it was a huge, massive effort. And so again, it felt very mission-driven to try to take what I knew about product development and innovation and apply it to the campaign world. So I think because I'm in Australia, okay, yeah, so this was me on day one. This is my favorite picture, because I started on April 5th of 2014, and I was by myself, and these are the people I hired over that time period. So that last picture on the right is election day. And I think that's Bill Clinton, that's Tim McCain, and then that's the team by itself. But it's impressive growth. Like, anyone who runs a startup knows to grow from 0 to 80 in that time frame is crazy. And then this is our, like, I don't know, we called it like the trailer park. I don't know. That's where we watched That's the tech team trying to keep being SREs while watching some debate or some moment on the election. This was, a normal company like Google, you get a standing desk. People stand at the desk. When people started on my team, I was like, here's boxes. You build your own standing desk. That's what's going on the left. The campaign in the toilet, I'm only going to talk about that if Holly asks me, so you just have to wait for that story. This was our team motto. Yeah, I'm not going to say that out loud for the people at home, but we just had to work under extreme pressure, extreme velocity. We had to win the primaries to get the Democratic nomination before we could compete in the general, and that meant during February to June, we had a moment each 2 to 3 days in one of the states, and so it was just incredible drama. And what did we build? So in the United States, voting is not compulsory. I have to say that in Australia because you guys will be like, why? That's crazy. And voter turnout is terrible. In this election, it was 58%. For Obama, 2008, it peaked at 62%, but it's normally hovering around the 60s. And so we have to convince voters to come out and care about engaging in their election. So activating voters is one big piece of the technology program. The second big piece is raising money. So in 2016, each candidate spent about $1 billion. And so to raise that kind of money in that short of a time is also an epic technology task. What kind of things did we build to accomplish this? Well, you won't be surprised to hear donations, and optimizing donations was a huge part of the technology efforts. We did all kinds of experiments all the time about what you make the defaults, whether it's 2 screens, 1 screen, 3 screens. You'd be surprised to hear about free stickers and like the motivating, yeah, you got one? Yeah, you got a hat, Julie got a hat. And if we could make it monthly, like if we could actually get you to store your credit card with us, we could do a lot of moment-by-moment based campaign asks, like if there was a debate and something was said that might have strong feelings by people. If we had been able to save your credit card, then we could send an email to you that says, give $1 now, and you could click on donate without ever having to go to a web page or authenticate again. So huge amount of innovation around donations. There's a whole team there's limited campaign giving in a presidential election. If you've maxed out, a lot of people like to use their time and energy to get other people to donate. So we built technology tools to help those people. They're called raisers. We built the first ever caucus companion. It would take the whole 20 minutes to explain this. Does anyone know what a caucus is? Julie knows. Ish? What is it? Yeah, okay. Oh, yes, Julie said I should keep giving out favorites. So you're my favorite right now. I should have brought prizes if I had stickers or something. I brought hats. Caucus there's 2 different ways a primary is resolved in the United States. One is, in New Hampshire, people go and vote, and they vote at machines, and it's private. The other, for Iowa and Nevada, you go in a room, and like Julie and I will stand over here, and we'll be like, we're with Hillary, and then some people stand here, I'm with Bernie, and over here they're with like Martin O'Malley, and you're physically voting with all of your neighbors looking at you, and it's crazy. And the math behind how that turns into delegates is crazy. So we built a caucus companion where not only could the people in the room make decisions fast using this mobile app, but like Hillary and the executive team back in headquarters knew real time what was happening, and that hadn't happened before in an election. This is a text messaging tool, so a lot of historical campaign activations had happened through people knocking on doors and showing up in person. I really felt strongly that the story of the 2016 campaign would be about text messaging activation, because you can reach a higher volume of people, and also they're more willing to engage with you on text than a stranger knocking at a door. And so this is just a animation showing what it would look like if you were sitting in one of our volunteer centers and trying to text, hey, reminder, get out to vote, polls are tomorrow, have you registered? And this was powerful. I don't even know, I'm just making up numbers here. Tens of millions of people were activated by text messaging on the day of the election. We did a lot of social media tools, so things that just tried to create buzz, tried to get people engaged with us, to volunteer, to share something with their friend, to donate $1. And the themes of the tools were often like an overlay on your Facebook image with a quote from our opponent, or an inspirational video where you could customize it but use some of the themes of the Hillary campaign. Or we called this one roulette. So you would like spin a roulette, and then like you would land on a year, and it would say what Hillary was doing versus Trump. And so just examples of social media tools all built in-house. A call tool. a mobile app. So we tried for the convention to say, what's a way to engage our supporters? We had millions and millions of people on our email list who had never donated, gone to an event, or some other things, maybe liked us on social media. And we're like, what are these millions of people who receive all of our email content and never, ever, ever take an action? And how can we engage them? And so this was sort of like a game that tried to get people to do lightweight actions. Are you guys impressed that we built all of this in 20 months? That's what I'm trying to leave you with. And then there's a whole policy and storytelling piece, which is, Bernie said free college, which is super great, but very expensive. Hillary said debt-free college. So people sitting at home didn't know what that meant. Like, what does it mean to me? What about my debt? What about my kid going to college? So we built interactive calculators to help people understand her position, which is all a part of helping them make a decision. Okay, I've left 3 seconds for Strava. I'm going to take 2 more minutes. Yeah, it's fine. Where's Holly? You're okay. You're getting ready for the calisthenics. So that was the Hillary campaign. I'm so proud of it. It was an epic journey, and it ended in crippling grief. So that's something I'm sure Holly and I can talk about. It's an impossible thing because it was essentially doing a startup where I knew from the minute I hired somebody that we were going out of business. Like by design, you're going out of business on election day. You spend all your money on election day. So doing that, even if we had won, would have been like disbanding a family. We worked almost 7 days a week for all of 2016. But to do that and run out of money and have to shut the doors, and everyone's going through crippling grief and shock. Most of the campaign had tickets to go to DC to start the transition team. It's about as hard a professional moment I think somebody could have. And it's not just that night, it goes on and on and on and on. So I'm incredibly proud of that journey, and it ended with such grief that it was hard for me to figure out what was next. And where do I go from here? And I did a lot of helping, mentoring, trying to share my knowledge about campaigns and technology in 2017. I was an entrepreneur in residence at a VC firm and tried to help other startups. Eventually, I joined a company that I love. It's called Strava. If you don't have it, download it. Strava, Strava, Strava. How many people here use it? Okay, good. For my friends at home, about 32%. Strava is a 9-year-old company. It's really about fitness tracking. We have almost 30 million athletes. It lets you, if I'm wearing a Garmin watch or if I'm carrying my mobile phone, you're going on a run or a bike, you press start, you go run, 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 bike, 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 press finish, press save. It has that route. It presents it to you. It shows you analytics and stats. The idea is that you memorialize your event, your athletic event for yourself. You have a digital community that supports you. We show you analytics and trends. We help you whether you're trying to maintain or get better. There's a lot of fun gaming aspects of leaderboards and segments. So if you're an athlete, and I use that word very broadly because anyone who moves in our world is an athlete, it's a fun thing to try. But one thing that I really thought was special about this is that Strava partners with cities to share aggregated athlete data to help cities design more bike lanes, defend green spaces, put trails in the right place. And so there's this combination of technology with the physical world and with city planning. That was a lot of themes of things I did at Google that I really love. And so I'll just show a few examples. You can imagine all the different reasons you might use this kind of data set. We had a great talk with all of the councils today with the city of Sydney about ways to apply this data. And just to show a simple example, Queensland was one of our first adopters of Strava Metro. And, oh man, I said this right earlier today. This is Inagara Creek. Okay, we're nodding. Where there was no way to get over that road, and so people were winding through residential streets to intersections. It was inefficient, a lot of bikes on crowded streets. And so this is an example of where Strava Metro data can be really useful, because once the yellow represents an underpass that was built to reroute traffic, then we can do things and say, what are the counts on every street in some month before and after this infrastructure? So you don't need to parse all of this, but the red numbers are before the underpass was built, and the blue numbers are after. And so we can say things like, yes, people are choosing to go through the underpass instead of through residential streets. And we can say that traffic increased more on the underpass than would naturally have increased just because it was going from fall into spring. I have to work on the other hemisphere directions. And so this helps the city say, like, was this a good infrastructure decision? Was it worth the cost? How do we tell people the story of how it's being used? Similarly, this is, I'm just going to call it the Snake Bridge. It's in Copenhagen. It sounds crazier in Danish. I'm not going to try it. But the Snake Bridge was built across one of the rivers where, because there was no easy way to go across the river without carrying your bike up 40 or 50 stairs, people would have to take an almost kilometer-long detour. That's the big U shape in yellow that you see in this image. And then they put in that crazy orange snake bridge that everyone loves. It's about 330 meters long, totally shortcut this path. And then we can do analysis like on that orange arterial bridge, which is the piece of infrastructure after the snake bridge, there was a 78% increase in bike traffic before and after implementation, and that roundabout, almost 94% decrease in bike traffic. So, you know, the city planners can say, hey, was this a good use of infrastructure? How are people using it afterwards? Right, so that was my last example for Strava. The themes of it are data that helps city planning, data that can be in a toolkit for any city that's trying to make it their city safer for people who are trying to move about it, not in cars. And that was the end of my talk, which is just to say one reason I suggested this topic when I was talking about the city of Sydney is I just think as engineers, as product people, as designers, sometimes we don't think about how we can apply our talents in non-traditional spaces. And if you go somewhere like government, a nonprofit, a city, you just go somewhere where your skill set is unique, your impact can be amplified, and really, really wonderful things can happen. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. What a whirlwind, hey? An incredible career to touch on. I know, no doubt that there will be plenty in the room who've got questions. One of the first things that struck me was your comment that you made around the sharp contrast going from, say, the Google resource-rich world to the scrappy entrepreneurial Hillary campaign.
Yeah.
How different is the product development and innovation process when you're working in completely different environments like that?
Yeah, it's radically different because you might think that there's some infrastructure for the Democratic Party that persists between election cycles, but that's not how it works. So we really started from scratch, all the analytics infrastructure, all the tools for everything, like how you manage code, how do you do bugs, how do you publish, how do you do monitoring and maintenance, like every single thing had to be picked. And so if you are an engineer and you're starting today at a Google, you can probably be up and running and being pretty effective building on top of this like huge technology stack that provides all the services and infrastructure and databases and scalability and reliability. And you have all of that and you're like doing like some really fun, innovative thing on top of it. At the campaign, we had to build it all. Any entrepreneur will like know what I'm talking about. Of course, we leveraged AWS and like lots of traditional, new, modern, cloud-based tools, but we're still starting from scratch. And that's really, really hard, especially because I was there by myself. And on paper, I haven't written code in like 12 years. So, and then all these people were looking at me because I got there on April 5th. I think we had to launch her campaign on April 12th. And I was like, wow. Where's the website? And you're going to build it, Steph. And I was like, with what team? Like, I'm here by myself. And so entrepreneurs will know that kind of like intense pressure with minimal resources. And I think that was a huge theme of challenge. And then the other side was just recruiting. Like Google is like, you can quote me on this. No, I'm just saying, throw the money at all the money in the world. Like if you work at Google, there's like equity and compensation and bonuses, and like they're so competitive they kind of define the market. I couldn't pay people even a third of Google salaries, and I can't even tell you how many times I said, the equity I can give you is equity in America.
It's a good line. I like that.
I used it a lot because I was like, you have to believe, and that's what made the crippling loss even harder, is that anyone who chose to leave a Twitter or an Uber to come to the campaign did it because they were mission-driven, because there was something about this campaign, this moment, an issue, gay marriage, Wall Street reform, immigration, healthcare. Like there's something that made them say, I'm going to leave a cushy, amazing, cool technology job, but I'm going to go to an environment where I'm paid a fraction of what I could be worth. I'm going to work 7 days a week. We sat like in a space this big, like 3 people to a space. There's just like, I can't even describe how jam-packed in there we were, and there's a very big belief in campaigns that FaceTime is important. And most technology people are used to working virtually or at home. I always had to decide as the CTO which culture things do I try to adopt from a campaign and which do I kind of try to repel or like try to change. And so just that, like the recruiting piece was like astronomically hard.
And I wanted to ask you about that because I've read that you've said you recruit diverse teams with a tolerance for chaos, which I think sounds perfectly apt given the environment you've just described. But talk to us about how you built that team, because one of the things that really struck me was you had 40% women in your team, and there was certainly diversity in many more ways than just gender.
Yeah.
So you don't have much to offer.
Yeah.
You've got the want, though, to really make sure you're getting the right mix of people.
Yeah.
How did you build the right team dynamic?
And I'll just say, to be honest, it was 40% at the peak. And then in the last month, everything went off the rails. You can imagine that we just needed a whole bunch of people to get through the final push to the general election. But yes, I did work really hard to recruit women and a diverse team, and I was incredibly proud of it. I think the chaos piece, which I didn't really understand because I didn't know exactly what I would be doing as CTO, and so what I figured out really fast is when I only had 2, 3, 4, or 5 engineers in the beginning, I could only work on either the website or a donation tool or a field tool like a commit to caucus experience for Iowa or an analytics tool, but I couldn't do all of the above. And what was important could change day to day. Like I would think over here that a field tool was the most important thing, and then some new information would come in, and we're launching a joint fundraising account with the DNC, and that launches tomorrow. And I'd be like, we don't even have a concept of 2 fundraising accounts. So that's why chaos tolerance was so important, as in the beginning I had to like move people around constantly. And I think, a lot of it's the interviewing, the experience people have had describing chaotic situations. How do you deal with stress? Case studies of kind of experience and how they would handle it, lots of different things. And that took time. Like, I don't think in the early days I got it perfectly right. Also, I was making all these decisions by myself because I had no team. So my interviewers were like friends from Google, Obama 2012 alumni, nice person I met on the street who seemed like a good engineer. I was using a different set of people. And then once we had some kind of critical mass, like by the time we got to 7 or 8 engineers, then we were doing our own interviews. So that was one piece of it. And the second piece of it was, I would just say, recruiting women, not shockingly, was easier than at Google because of the mission, because we were trying to put the first woman in the White House. And I think that helped me get some of my friends to leave Google and come on the journey. And I will also say, as probably anyone in here cares about recruiting a diverse team, once you have some women engineers, it becomes easier to recruit women engineers. So it's always the first that's the hardest, because they're going to be the one alone person there. When people started to interview and they would walk around and they would see lots of women there, when their interview panel included 1 or 2 women, I think the trajectory got easier for us. For me as the CTO, I think it is important to always have a woman on the interview loop. I think it's important to talk about all different skill sets and interaction styles. So there's always the content of whether somebody is skilled at the job, and then sort of how they do their work, how they talk to people, whether they have unconscious bias, whether they're sensitive, whether they're learning beings. And we made sure our interview debriefs included both of those things. So yeah, those are some of the tactics. And then just constantly in New York City, because I had no network, I would go to every kind of woman meetup event, every coding event, just trying to get the message out there that the campaign is a place that you can work, because even that awareness didn't exist.
Nice. Now, Phil, I can't let the audience down. I've got to ask about the Hillary campaign in the toilet.
Yeah.
You alluded to, but didn't elaborate on. What happened?
No, I was like, cliffhanger. If anyone who was thinking of going outside would be.
Yeah, they stayed for the suspense. I know.
I know. Now it's going to be lifetime, because literally the door to the women's bathroom broke, and there were 6 women trapped inside, and they literally couldn't get out. And the only way they got help, because nobody knew they were stuck in there, is Jen Palmieri, who is our head of communication. She was Bill Clinton's chief of staff. She's a very luminary human being. She just wrote a book that everyone's very excited about, tweeted and said, "We are stuck in the bathroom. Somebody come help us." Then somebody let them out. They took a picture of the 6 women stuck in the bathroom, and the next day it was on the cover of the New York Post. Literally, the campaign was not in the toilet. Women were stuck in the bathroom.
There we go. I didn't expect that. I don't know about you. That was not the angle I thought we were going for there.
That was a cliffhanger.
So, I mean, the whole theme of tonight's event is around tech for social good. And when I look back at what happened in that election, I think you can almost say it was tech for bad, when particularly with some of the revelations that have come out in the last 6 months. How do you kind of reconcile that as an entrepreneur that's in this space, that's thinking about data for good, data for bad, what we need in place to make sure that these tools, this capability is stewarded in the right way?
Yeah, it's important, and it's such a big question. Like, I think we could all have a dialogue about that, and everyone would have different ideas. And of course, it's heartbreaking having gone through it, and then to hear subsequently and much later about some of the tactics that might have made the fight competition we were in not fair. And so I think what we have to do is look forward, and I think the practices we need to put in place and hold technology companies accountable for. I worked at Facebook, and I have a lot of friends who work on the elections and politics team at Facebook, and I think they're doing really smart things, like trying to show now on every news article the source, and they're trying to show bias, and they're trying to be transparent about where information is coming from, and they're trying to be thoughtful about being transparent with their ranking algorithm. And I think things like that and holding technology companies accountable for that is really important. And I also just think technology only plays so much of a role because it's really about individual people and how much they do diligence about the news they're reading. There's a lot of people who are reading the news constantly, have made their election politics choices now for the midterms 2018 in November in the US. And then there's some people who don't engage at all, and they're making their decisions in those last days, if not hours, before an election happens. And so those are the people we need to make sure engage with content in a different way, and so they're making their decision based on accurate information. And that's a much harder social change problem. Like technology, I guess what I'm trying to say in some words, like technology is a piece of it, but the bigger piece of it is like how people make decisions, how they interact with technology, how persuadable they are, and that source too. So I think, we just all have to be, hopefully in all elections going forward, a lot more critical and skeptical of what we're reading, and then the technology practices of the companies behind it and what they're doing to be transparent.
You used the phrase when you were talking crippling grief, talking about the end of the campaign. And I think it's something that's quite common to every entrepreneur's journey, is those back against the wall moments where it's gone horribly wrong, or it hasn't worked, or you've had a setback, or I'd love to get your insight on what you've learned on how to push through those moments, what those periods of real difficulty and failure have taught you.
Yeah. Luckily, I've had a lot of them, so I have so many to choose from. I also say Google Wave ending was like a different kind of grief, because we were a startup inside of Sydney, and I think we had so much potential, and we were a startup inside of Google, and Google decided to stop investing in us, and that was the moment when Google started building Google Plus and Google's own social network. And for me, that was also very difficult because we were a sort of a startup inside of this big company, but we didn't control our own resources. And to your point about what I learned from it is sometimes after the moment, like it's all you can do is like try to feel your emotions and feel your grief. Because when I started doing interviews after Google Wave got canceled and I was looking at other jobs, if somebody asked me about it during an interview, I would get really defensive. And I'd be like, we didn't fail. I'd be very semantic, like we didn't fail. Google didn't invest in us anymore, and that's different than failing because we had 1 million active users, and I would tell myself this whole narrative. But in truth, by any measure, we failed. So I had to go through my process of getting over the defensiveness, and then I tried to switch. No matter what failure thing happened, whether it's Google Wave or losing an election, the learning curve is through the roof. If you try something ambitious and you fail, I would say that to any entrepreneur here, you probably learned more in that period of time than if you had been at a more traditional big tech company or more stable environment. And so you just have to cling to what did I learn and how do I apply that to my next thing. And for Google Wave, we built live concurrent editing in the browser, and that was a very innovative thing that got carried into other Google products. If you see the carrots moving around when you're typing in Google Docs, how you can see how other people are typing, that's all Google Wave code, and that UI element is Google Wave code. And I really do believe, even genuinely, that the themes of what we're trying to do are what the Quip or the Slack and other cool technology things that have happened later are now making real, which is about how people collaborate in the new modern world. So then you try to learn from it and be able to tell that story, and most importantly, apply those lessons to your next venture.
I love one of the things you touched on towards the end of your presentation, where you were talking about applying talent in non-traditional ways. I know you're a big believer in sort of getting yourself outside of your comfort zone, being curious, opening your eyes up to the world and sort of challenging your perspective. How do you practically do that? What advice have you got for people in the room who are going, you know what, I'm capable in technology, I want to grow the social impact I'm having, or I want to accelerate my idea.
Yeah.
How do you bring that to life in a day-to-day, month-to-month sense?
Yeah, well, I think it completely depends what environment you're in. Like, we're going to hear pitches from 3 startups who are trying to do exactly that with their like core day-to-day thing they're building. And I know they're 3 representative companies of tons of social entrepreneurs or people trying to solve philanthropic or social good problems. So I think there's a huge spectrum. Like, those are people who maybe have been brave enough to take the risk and say, I'm going to make this my whole thing, and I'm going to try to build a real business around it and a viable company around it. But a lot of my stories weren't, as an entrepreneur, they were me at Google and me working in a really big company in Google and looking for those moments like the story I told you about Gmail, where you're like, oh, this amazing tool, if we built it and it's like a better tool, is there a way we can give access to every entity around the world for free to run their business or their school on it? And so that was looking for a moment within my day job was truly Gmail, growing consumer Gmail to millions of users. But my like 20% project over here was like, and how can I even magnify that impact in other ways? And it was a long time before that project changed from 20% into something big. The same thing with the transit example, that was a 20% project for a really long time. So I think if like taking the full leap and like doing it full time and in a scrappy entrepreneurial way isn't possible, you can still look for ways in your day-to-day work to find those moments. The last thing I'll say is when you look for jobs, like if you're at a moment where you're like in transition, I don't know about everyone here, but a lot of people in Silicon Valley, if they were looking for a job, would go through the like Uber, Airbnb, Twitter, Google, Facebook, Square, Stripe, Dropbox. They're all in like a 5-block radius around where I work. And they're all amazing companies. If my friends are listening from those companies, I love you. You're an amazing company. They're all great, but I think you should take time to say, and in addition to those paths, what could I do? I talked to the Nature Conservancy about being a CTO there, a really large conservation agency. I looked at a lot of mental health startups when I was looking for a job. I looked at going back into government, but at the state or local level. So like just broaden your search. It doesn't mean you're at the right moment in your career to make that jump, but at least know those are options and like spend time evaluating them.
One of the things that strikes me about your career is that you have pioneered continuously, be it working inside an existing company and working on the new idea and the next frontier, be it creating maps from scratch where they didn't exist. How have you supported yourself in those moments? How have you wrapped kind of the learning around you or the people around you that you've needed to give yourself the greatest likelihood of success?
Well, first of all, thank you. It's really hard to hear, like when people are saying nice things about you, like pioneering, it's hard to be like receiving compliments, so thank you.
It's true.
I appreciate it. Gosh, it's a good question. I think I don't think, if I was being honest, I wouldn't say I'm been fully successful at creating the right support structures, especially in the Hillary campaign, which was without a doubt the most stress any human being has ever been under. I've never worked in an environment where I had so little, and also people didn't understand what I was doing. If you work at Google or Facebook, everyone knows what a product manager does and an engineer does, and there's at a Facebook or a Google, engineers are sort of the top of the pyramid of importance and resources. And at the campaign, it would be the opposite. There's just a lack of awareness about what an engineer does. And so I had to also constantly be explaining to people why I wanted to do my job and why I was trying to hire so many engineers. And they were like, yeah, we get you, but let's hire those engineers in August of 2016. And I'd be like, no, the field organization is going to go from 100,000 people to 5 million people in terms of volunteers in June. And so if you don't let me have engineers till August, I can't build the new field tools that we need to move to mobile canvassing. And if we don't get engineers in time, people are going to be carrying around packs of paper to canvas, and it's going to be very old school. So I would say it's so funny how important Facebook was to me during the campaign, because I was in an environment where people didn't understand what I was doing. And so getting support from my Silicon Valley network was really key. And anytime a Silicon Valley CEO came anywhere in the New York City area, like Stuart, who founded Slack, the Collison brothers who founded Stripe, Mike Strepp, the CTO of Facebook, if anyone came in a 5-mile radius of New York City, I was like, you have to come to the campaign and you have to tell my team they're doing a good job. I didn't think my team could get enough sort of accolades and recognition inside, so I would use luminary figures to come in and pump them up and just say we see you, we care about you. when this is over, we want to talk to you, and just try to create that kind of support. So it's a good question, but I think, I know we talked about this a little before, but probably like I didn't take care of myself for most of my adult life, and it was only when I had a health crisis that I sort of learned that you can't be at work 18 hours a day, you can't drink soda 18 hours a day, like you can't, it's just not sustainable. So I'd say a lot of my early career, I was like thrive, on like sleepless nights and caffeine, and I got a lot of stuff done. And it's only in the last few years that I've been like, oh, hey, you have to shut off your laptop, you have to meditate, you have to go out into nature, you have to do things to help, sustain yourself.
And I think that's a really great topic. I wouldn't mind touching on a little bit more, because I think sometimes finding that line when you're really driven and passionate about what you're doing, making sure that you look after yourself, that you still make time for the people that matter to you and all those sorts of things, that's something I think we do tend to learn after we get it wrong, probably rather than beforehand. How have your kind of habits or the commitments that you've made to yourself changed since your health crisis?
Yeah, so I think for most of my adult life, till I was 39, I slept like 3 or 4 hours a night, tops. Like never more than that.
Wow.
Who's with me? Anyone? It's not that bad. Okay, great.
There's a few people.
All right. He's saying that, so you're my new favorite. I think I had a stressful college career where I went to Stanford, but for a bunch of family reasons, didn't really have enough money to go to Stanford. And so I worked many, many jobs, and I think that was when this kind of frenetic energy of like working really hard started, and sustained me through. I worked at a startup that got acquired by Cisco Systems, and then I worked at Google for 10 years, and then I went right into the campaign. These are all kind of high stress environments. And so I had a health crisis at 39, and I just needed to lose weight because I was going to have a surgery, and the heavier I was, the more risky the surgery would be. And so I went to like a wellness camp in California. I don't think I actually knew what I was signing up for. It turns out I like hiked 80 miles in 6 days.
Wow.
If you don't know you're going to do that, it's pretty shocking. And this isn't like the Malibu hills, but it's really Malibu mountains, and they were very like strenuous hikes. I didn't have any of the right equipment, didn't have gear, didn't know what was going on. But through that, I learned not just about hiking as a way to do fitness, but also nutrition, and I learned a lot of good practices about nutrition. And that like period of time when I gave up, I'm just going to say it, people, I gave up alcohol, I gave up cheese, dairy, gluten, sugar, anything good. And I lost a lot of weight, and people were always like, oh my, it was so visual. People were like, oh my God, what happened? Like, tell me your secret. And I was like, eat green plants. Green plants for breakfast, green plants for lunch, green plants for dinner. It's really simple. And it worked, and it was really effective. And like, of course, losing weight was important. I had the surgery, it went perfect, super healthy, everything's fine, because I was so healthy at the time of the surgery. But for me, the big transformation was sleep. That was like the first time when I gave up, I think especially alcohol, I started sleeping 7 hours a night. And I was like, I don't know, Cinderella, or what's the music, Belle, Beauty and the Beast. I don't know, when you're like butterflies are around you and the world is like sparkly and everything.
Yep.
Yeah, everything was different. I would tell everyone, like, have you heard of this thing called sleep? And I felt like I was the first person who ever knew. Yeah, I was so happy. And then I was just emotionally resilient. Like nothing would faze me. Like people could be like, you're terrible at your job. And I'd be like, I don't believe you. And I would like, like I was like very strong and confident in my own, whereas I can tell other periods of my life when I had low resilience, or like I was emotionally depleted, and somebody's like, you're bad at your job, and I would like crumble. So anyways, that was just sort of, for me, that was the year and a half before the campaign, and I had such good practices, and Google has free food everywhere that's healthy. They have free food everywhere that's unhealthy, but they have a lot of healthy stuff too. And so then I guess the hardest part for me about the campaign was going from that supported environment, lots of resources, a regular workday, into like the crazy environment of the campaign, and then keeping up with the good practices was hard. But I think, to your point, like making space for things like finding a healthy alternative to pizza, which was what 98% of the campaign was fueled on, finding time to meditate, finding time to still go and be in nature, which is pretty hard in New York City. But I wasn't as good during the campaign, but I didn't fully lose all of my good practices, and I know that's part of what helped me kind of sustain.
I want to take it back to the kind of reason we're here, which is this whole theme around tech for social good.
Yeah.
What frontiers of that advancement get you really excited right now? What are you watching with sort of bated breath going, oh my gosh, I'm so excited for what this might do for the world?
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question. Holly, why didn't you send it to me earlier? So I could have been really thoughtful. I mean, the truth is I've been really focused on Strava because if anyone has noticed, not that you know my company, minutes after I took the job, there was a press cycle about our heat map and how athletes were using it in military sensitive zones, and that's kind of become a very dramatic and big story. And we absolutely have no issues or bugs. There's privacy settings, people can hide their data, like we didn't do anything wrong. It doesn't mean you're not under constant scrutiny. So that's been sort of my life for the last 4.5 months. But what I did really love was looking at all the pitches, because in advance of coming here, I got to see some of the cool things that people are trying to do here in terms of using virtual reality to help people experience or understand disabilities or challenges in different ways. People are trying to use apps to help with, gosh, I saw so many cool things that are probably going to be pitched here in a minute. To give access to different people from maybe disenfranchised groups to jobs or communities or support or different things like that. I don't know, there's just the power of data, like the power of data that, you know, the way I talked about Strava data being used for city planning, but I think there's all sorts of like ways data sets like that can be used for mental health or supporting people in times of crisis and need. I think Google, especially on the AI front, is doing amazing things with health and like how these assets and data, there's just so much about how it can transform healthcare, more accurate diagnosis early at low cost. Like there's like infinite amazing stuff happening. And I hope at some point I can lift up, like in the next 10 minutes, to see more of that.
And I want to ask you about the heat map crisis. I mean, you've had a background in disaster relief, so you've probably been well attuned to dealing with urgent situations. Yeah. But what's it like in those moments? How do you respond? What's the right way to go about thinking through a problem when you're in the eye of the storm?
Yeah, so as the product person for Strava, when a cycle like that starts, your number one thing has to be, is there something wrong? Like, is there a bug? Did we leak data? Is something wrong? And that has to be the first analysis, and that's what we did and said, no, like there's maybe some skeptical, I don't know what the right word, suspicious choices these athletes made, but they had access to privacy settings and they didn't choose to use it. So that's the first thing, and then you have to say, okay, great, do people understand privacy settings? Like, do they know it's available? Do they know that they can opt in and out of heat map, that they can opt in and out of social features, that they can make their whole account private or an individual activity private? And so we sort of did an inventory of privacy settings, and we immediately, within 24 hours, put out a bunch of new software for things like we didn't have consistent access to privacy settings on web, Android, and iOS. And so we immediately made those all consistent. If you say you wanted to be an enhanced privacy athlete, which is like Holly has to say yes to me following her stuff. And we made it so if you turned on enhanced privacy, everything else was hidden so that we didn't have disparate or confusing choices. So immediately you try to figure out what are product things I can do to help the situation. We did the same with the heat map itself. We had only been building it on a yearly cadence, and that means if you saw something in the heat map you didn't like, you changed your privacy settings. For that to actually trickle down to the real heat map would take a long time. We now build it on a monthly basis, and so we made product changes like that. So that's the kind of, is there a bug, product changes, and the third category I would just say is once this happened, a lot of malicious actors tried to get into Strava to find those athletes. And that's not a good thing. We want to protect our athletes more than anything. And so we tried to look for like behaviors that were suspicious. Like you've never been on Strava, you logged in, you created a segment in Iraq, you immediately started searching and trying to find like unique athletes on that segment. Like that's not a positive use of the Strava community for good. And so we found ways to kind of rate limit or constrain people who are completely new to the system in the spirit of letting existing athletes and positive actors in the community still use tools, but trying to prevent malicious actors. And then the highest level was just, do we keep the heat map up? Like that's a natural product choice you have to make, which is like, is this thing creating enough value to kind of sustain in spite of all of these concerns. And for us, the heat map is a really, really powerful tool for people to discover routes in areas they've never been in. It's really the only tool Strava has today to say, like, I want to do some kind of 40-kilometer bike ride that leaves from the Sydney Bridge and is this elevation, and that's the really only way you can navigate the world. And we are a community of athletes who are trying to explore the world, and so we did that analysis and felt very strongly that we should leave it up, but that was part of the response too.
A lot of times tonight you've touched on the role of communication, be that communicating internally as I'm the engineer working here at the political campaign, through to the role of that externally. I'm interested in the work that you're doing now. I think a lot of entrepreneurs face the challenge of sort of, I'm pitching the new idea, or I'm seeking collaboration, or I'm after the right partner. Right now, you're working with cities all over the world to shape the way that they will run in the next decades to come. What have you learned about the best way to position a new idea so that a stakeholder gets it and buys in?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the more, probably any entrepreneur here knows this, is like the more you have some set of tools, programs, data, user stories, testimonies to support your message, the more powerful it is. So when my friends are, if you're a Google alumni, you can pretty much get money for a startup without ever having written a line of code, because there's so much enthusiasm for Google engineers. And I always tell my friends, like, it's better to bootstrap a prototype, get 100 of your friends to use it, have some analytics and data, show your iteration process, have a story to tell. And I just think it gets richer and more compelling the further you are along in that journey. And if you can't build it, if you're not an engineer or you don't have the time or resources to build it, then you can still do user research. When I was doing my own startup in 2012 around like the energy space, I used Google consumer surveys to just do lightweight surveys. Like, here's a question related to how you manage your energy in your home, how you deal with your thermostat, what brand do you use Wi-Fi, do you care? Like, we just did a lot of lightweight consumer surveys for like $10 or $20, and then you can have that as your asset. So I think a powerful communication is when there's like a body of stories, users, prototypes, data that can support the thing you're trying to do.
Awesome. And it's not long now till we're going to invite our 3 sets of entrepreneurs up here. So I wanted to ask, for the benefit of everyone in the room who's sitting there with an idea that's burning away, it could be one they're already working on, that they're thinking about, how do I go faster and better at. Some of you, it might be something that's maybe sat on the back burner for a little while and you haven't gotten off the ground. What's your best bit of advice of how to get out there and start?
Such a good question. I'm thinking.
Think away.
I know. It's just so interesting. It depends what you're trying to do, because it depends, like, you might be in a moment of trying to recruit your first engineer or your CTO co-founder. You could be trying to raise money. You could be trying to raise brand awareness. Like, I think the thing you would do is different for what moment you are in the journey for your company.
Is there a particularly significant piece of advice that's really helped you in consistently throughout the career positions you've been in?
It's so, and I'm just saying it out loud because I know it's unfair. I did a lot of my stuff inside of Google, which has like all the resources in the world. And then I did a bunch of startups where I raised money and then didn't end up building the thing I thought I was going to build. So I guess what I would say is my advice more than anything is to your team. Like, it's no matter what, your team. Like, I make all my job choices now by team. I think the early hires, whether it's your co-founder, your first 3 hires, it's crazy important. When you're going to pitch for money, people are going to ask you about your team, the dynamics of the team, how you work together. When you're in the trenches and you're having the worst, day or night of your life, and you like need support, the people are what will make the difference. So I guess if I had like one piece of advice, it's not going to shock entrepreneurs, but I think those investments early in like picking your team and deciding your culture and values and being explicit about them is probably the most important thing.
And what's core to you when it comes to culture and values?
I mean, I had like a value on the campaign, which was brains need breaks. Like, brains need breaks because nobody believed it. Like, the burnout culture on campaigns is really, really big. But I think if I had to pick one that's more generic, it's about authenticity. Like, authenticity of you as a person, authenticity of the product you're trying to build and the stories you're trying to tell around it. Like, to me, authenticity has been really important.
Awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, can we give a big hand for Steph Hannon?
Thank you.
I feel very lucky to have been the one up here getting to ask the questions, but as I promised, we will turn the microphones over to you before too long. But now we're going to invite up a couple of Sydney-based startups to share a 2-minute pitch about their business, and then to ask a question of Steph, or to have a couple of minutes exchange where we'll put learning live into action, which will be really, really awesome. So I'm now going to invite up the first of our startups. Now we're going to welcome up Ivy from Catalyzer. Little bit of a backstory. Catalyzer is a female-led tech startup helping people find greater purpose at work. I'm going to leave Ivy to do the rest. Can you give her a hand?
Hi everyone, good evening. So I'm Ivy Robinson, co-founder of Catalyzer, and we're technology for purpose-driven companies. So around the world at the moment, we're really seeing the rise of the purpose movement. Companies are spending around $300 billion a year trying to differentiate themselves. They're trying to articulate what they stand for, both to their customers and their employees. But bringing your purpose to life is really, really difficult. Companies who are trying to operationalise their purpose at the moment are spending around 40 hours a week trying to manage pro bono programs, volunteering programs, charity partnerships, and lots of fundraising events. Their time's taken up by a lot of manual processes, admin, data everywhere, and reporting that's really, really hard. But Catalyzer's here to help. We help companies bring their purpose to life by engaging their employees in really practical activities that also have a social impact. So for employees, we give them a beautiful marketplace where they can choose pro bono projects, volunteering opportunities, they can get involved in crowd funds for causes that mean things to them, they can support their colleagues, and of course make regular donations. For the companies, we give them all the tools and the metrics so that they can track, measure and report and tell their best social impact story. We've already got 19,000 employees using Catalyzer in the UK, Asia and Australia, and we've already facilitated $2.5 million in donations to charities, which we're really proud of because we're just getting started. And what about the social impact? So together with our clients, who include Deloitte, Macquarie Bank, ASIC and King & Wood Mallesons, just to drop a few names. We've helped sick children in regional and remote areas access medical care for the very first time. And we've also helped homeless young people access a really innovative social enterprise to access retraining and employment for a second chance at life. Awesome. So tonight we don't have a particular ask. We're just really honoured to be here as part of the conversation with Steph and Holly. But if your workplace would be a better place with purpose-driven employee giving, we'd love you to get in touch and we'd love to see how we can help. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Ivy. So, Ivy, any questions for Steph or anything that's relevant for you based on what you've heard?
So many questions. But my one question is about increasing adoption and making adoption more mainstream. So for us, we're in the space, we're sort of working with companies who buy a lot of transactional software, like payroll giving software, things like that. For technology with social impact, it's about the long game. It's about collecting data and showing social impact over time. So our customers are the most progressive. They're really innovative companies. They're the thought leaders. I'd love to hear any thoughts about how we broaden the adoption and I guess get the message across and make it more mainstream.
Great question.
So first, I'm so happy to meet you. Thank you for what you're trying to do. I was really excited to hear about it. For you, for the progressive early adopters, have you been able to create case studies that have shown the impact on their employees in terms of happiness or retention or other key metrics?
Definitely. We've got some really good stats. But again, I think the whole challenge of being a startup is you're only a few years old and the data is only a few years old. So we can definitely start to tell some stories about spikes upon implementation. But long-term social impact, it's still going to take us a few years.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I think that's part of it, which I'm sure you're already doing, which is, as I was saying before, how can you use data from existing customers, even if a small sample, to tell the story of what you're trying to achieve. The other question I would have to you, there's direct sales and then there's going through channels, because you mentioned all these online HR benefits platforms like the Gustos or Zendesks or Zen Payroll or others of the world. And you could also use them. Can you get a channel partner that helps you get credibility and sort of share the pie in a way that's a net add for them? And I don't know if you've explored channel partners.
We're just in early stages, but that's a great suggestion. Thanks.
Yeah. I'm excited to hear about your first big win. What was the moment where you were like, we have something here, where like a Macquarie or somebody got on board?
So we were still working our full-time jobs. I had a 6-week-old baby and a 2-year-old. We got our first client. And we were sort of moonlighting. We were sort of doing Catalyzer. It was still conceptual. We had no product. We had a bit of a click-through prototype. And we found in the law firm King & Wood Mallisons just an amazing partner who wanted to co-create.
Yeah.
They were just so enthused about creating a tool that would not only work for them but would work for other companies. And so that was definitely the first moment where we said, I think what we're onto could help a lot of people.
Yeah, that's exciting. Maybe in our 9 seconds left, I'm just going to say the other just thought I had for you is the more you can focus your pitch onto like a single thing. For example, employee assistance programs are like the way employees in US companies get mental health support, and they're terrible. Like the bar is so low. And so like there's a lot of companies trying to replace those, and it's like very easy to get like a diff because I think yes, I think it's a legal requirement that you have to have that kind of benefit. And so if you're trying to replace something that's like already entrenched but is a terrible experience, that's an easier sell than like this is a thing you've never heard of and I'm trying to convince you to care. And I don't know enough to know the exact analogy there, but I think it's almost better to do one thing really great than have a suite of things where they have to pick and choose. And so it might be something to think about.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ivy. Okay, our next business up is Loop Plus. Now, the tagline I've been given here is that it's a Fitbit for bums, using a pressure-sensing wheelchair cushion and feedback platform to help prevent pressure sore injuries. How cool. Please welcome Kath and Chris.
So we've got a bit of a crowd here. So I'm Kath Hamilton, the founder of Loop, Claire, my sister, and Chris, our general manager. So every day someone's paralysed in Australia. And on the 19th of May 2011, that was actually Claire's son, Evander. He was born with a tumour pressing on his spine that left him paralysed. Now the impact in just 7 years on his life in a wheelchair has been repeated hospitalisations for pneumonia, scoliosis, and recurring pressure sores. Now while Claire was living through this, I had an amazing job at Yahoo and managing digital at Westfield. But I could see the impact that digital health was making in the real world, and I couldn't help but think, how can I get involved in that? So I started fiddling around with Fitbits, and I just was thinking, can we find a way to increase the daily healthy habits of people in wheelchairs, and what can we do? Well, we couldn't find anything that would make a difference off the shelf. So with Claire and wheelchair users and other families and therapists, we've built an activity tracker for wheelchairs. It actually has a positive feedback loop that connects families and the therapists and people in wheelchairs to build the insights around healthy living and risks. So it's a pad that sits within the wheelchair. It connects to a mobile app and then continuously through the day measures everything that's going on with the body. So the physiotherapists and OTs can prescribe goals that can be tracked and even iterated within our patient management system. And so for the first time, everybody has access to the same data. And this is really empowering for wheelchair users because they can be collaborating and actually accountable for their own care. Because Loop Plus actually manages to share what's going on throughout the day in terms of the stresses on the body. What are the activities and behaviours that are causing those stresses, and enables them to do something about it themselves. And this is really at the heart of it. This is what we're saying is making it visible, making it knowable, and then making it really achievable. So this self-efficacy is what drives sustained behaviour change and the healthy habits that we're after. So you can see that this can really be applied to many more applications than just wheelchair users. And we actually had an OT gave us, I'll read the quote, an OT gave us some great feedback. When you give a person the opportunity to really see what they do in a day, you will change their world. That's amazing, right? To be changing people's world. And for me, that's really the power of technology for social good. It's attracting the talent and being able to solve amazing problems. And I think that's what you've been talking about all night, really. So that's what Loop
Brilliant.
Plus is about. Thank you very much.
Well done.
Thank you.
Kath, Claire, Chris. Brilliant. Do you have a
Were you
question?
going to add something?
No, we're here for the Q&A.
I'm just excited to hear if you're a user. How's it going?
Absolutely. Look, I've used it. Bottom line, I suppose, is, as you've heard, Fitbit for your bum. I have a bum and I have a wheelchair. Unfortunately, they don't often play nicely together. We're quite susceptible to pressure areas and pressure wounds. And there's no way of us knowing. You guys, I think someone once said it's something like 72 times a minute you shuffle in your chair, you able-bodied people. We don't realise. We're compressing the flesh between bone and the area we're sitting on, and that can cause horrendous issues later on. In fact, you can have to lay off that for 1 to 2 years. Worst case I've heard is someone having to lie on their side or off their back for 6 years.
Wow.
Imagine that if you've got kids, got family, you know, just trying to, you work or used to work, and all the connotations that go with it. And these are some of the unseen things with paraplegia or quadriplegia or other wheelchair users that we're trying to look over. Sorry, I should be looking at you. I'm looking all over here.
I support you looking at everyone. I think the early adoption of Strava and Fitbit had a lot to do with competition. You know, getting people to be active and track things isn't easy. Do you guys have a competition or co-opetition aspect to your tool?
It's really interesting, actually. That's the one thing we were going to ask you, because at this stage, people get hooked straight away on being able to see their own data and for something that's been invisible. But yes, we desperately need that kind of thing to sustain the engagement.
Yeah, and that might be different, like that data set or the awareness might be so different, and that alone might be engaging enough. I think for Strava, what the unique thing was, we broke the world up into segments, and each segment in the world has a leaderboard. And so what really hooked people into Strava, especially competitive cyclists, was like being top of the leaderboard for their segment. And so it's just interesting to think about, like that might be a parallel that's not needed right now, but it's part of what worked for us. Yeah. Did you have a?
Yeah, I think when we first started with the concept of what Loop would be, it was built around my son, and he's a 7-year-old who does a lot of therapy. So I was thinking, how do I engage him? How do I keep doing, you know, as a mother, you know, keep pushing him to do things he doesn't really want to do? And, you know, the older he got, that was the problem. So, yeah, gamification of his therapy was something that we thought, you know, that could be something to work on. And then it kind of moved more into the pressure injury area, but, you know, definitely down the line, there are things that we want to continue looking at. Yep.
Yeah, and then this is probably obvious maybe, but is it a pad that can go in any wheelchair? Because I think that's the other thing, is like the less you have to deal with individual manufacturers and the more you can be, we call Strava Switzerland, so we're an ecosystem, and you can deal with like Garmin and Cinto and Fitbit and any kind of bike computer, any kind of device, the more your thing is portable so people don't have to choose something different than what they like, is to me really important. But it sounds like you guys are on top of that.
And not even just wheelchairs.
Yeah.
So the pad can be used in aged care facilities, in
interesting.
chairs.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
I just want to say I'm so excited to meet you, and it's such an important thing you're doing, and I loved this idea.
Can we give a hand to Loop Plus?
Holly, I think I'm supposed to be letting you ask questions.
No.
too. I'm sorry.
You need to take the lead. People want to pick this brain. I understand that. I've been doing that too.
Yeah.
Now, our third startup that's joining us on stage is Ascension. Well, please welcome back Sasha Sarago. I'm going to give you a little bit about them. Digital media platform that connects and inspires. It's actually Australia's first Indigenous and ethnic women's lifestyle magazine. Please welcome Sasha.
So I'm Sasha, founder of Ascension, Australia's first Indigenous and ethnic women's digital media lifestyle platform. Ascension helps lifestyle brands like Puma, Target, and Shea Moisture to connect and drive engagement with women of colour by creating marketing content that is culturally aligned to her unique needs and values. The current problem with brands is that there is a lack of representation of women of colour in their visual marketing content, which failing to adequately tap into a female economy, which is worth $23 trillion worldwide, and in Australia, a multicultural market with a purchasing power of over $75 billion per year. Growing up, I would bleach my hair, wear colored contact lenses, and sunscreen to lighten my skin because I struggled with my cultural identity, and I didn't know how to embrace my own beauty. I still find it incredibly hard to find products and brands that are suited to my skin tone and curly hair. And this leaves me frustrated by the lack of representation of women of color in fashion and media. The Ascension media platform is a safe space for women of color to be celebrated and for them to inspire each other through sharing content. It allows us to capture data, live data, that talks about their insights and attitudes and motivations. We currently have 6,000 influencers and subscribers, all working together to mainstream diversity for the next generation and to ascend our hidden figures into the light. I would love to connect with anyone who has experience with lifestyle brands tonight. Thank you.
Awesome. Now, I did speak to Sasha beforehand. She was bursting at the seams to ask you a couple of questions,
great.
so I know we're
Then
not going to be...
But then I have one for you.
All right.
You can go first.
You go first.
Oh my God, like I totally was freaked out because you swim with sharks. I was like, what could I possibly ask her? So my question to you, Stephanie, is can you provide any advice on new technology or new ways of collecting data and then translating those insights into a meaningful engagement with a niche target market?
So my reaction to this quest you're on, which is so important and so big, is you have to make a pretty big choice. My guess is you already made it. How much you're going to try to build independent properties or tools versus how much you're going to try to do what you're trying to do on top of existing things like Facebook. Because we had to do that at the campaign. I would say that Obama in 2012 built his own app and his own virtual field office to try to get people to like engage with his campaign. In 2008, that was probably the right choice, but by 2016, it made so much more sense to invest on top of Facebook and on top of Twitter and on top of YouTube and try to get the content sharing, the influencers, the social media to be in the place people are already spending their time. So that was my question to you. Have you already made that choice about independent app or site versus leveraging all these existing platforms?
I think for us, leveraging off the existing platforms is going to be for us. I came out a bull at the gate with an app, and that just failed. So I learned a lot from that, of building something and hoping that they all come. So I think getting traction from a lot of like Snapchat, Facebook should be something that would serve us really well at this point.
Because there's still like completely viable ways to build businesses on top of those platforms. People are selling vintage clothes on Instagram now. Instagram's trying to make it easier to do transactions in that environment. So I think there's a lot of trends there that you can leverage. My other question to you is about feedback. Like I think for what you're doing, how do you create a compelling experience for the people you're trying to serve? And I wonder what your tactics have been for feedback and collecting that data.
The main feedback that we've had is about products and services that service women in fashion and beauty. So looking at models like subscription boxes that are curated and tailored to the woman so she can feel like she's valued is pretty much one of the major feedbacks that we have. And also in advertising, like really they just want to see their faces. And that builds brand loyalty. So that's the two key things that we've received.
And have you done that by talking to your friends, communities, like standing on the street? Like how do you do your research?
So my peers, doing Survey Monkeys, doing boosted Facebook posts, and focus groups as well within the community has been really helpful.
Yeah, okay, that's great. That's all I want to say to any entrepreneur. I had the privilege of going to spend time in Gaza and do this entrepreneurship teaching thing at Gaza Sky Geeks, which is a really important incubator there. And just there, the like concept of almost everyone in that incubator was building an app for taxis, like new payment systems for taxis in Gaza. Payment systems there are very unusual, and like not a single person in that room had ever talked to a taxi driver. And so like I got everyone up and I was like, you can go out of this room and for 2 hours, like don't come back until you've talked to like 5 taxi drivers. And that concept of just user research was so new in that forum. I'm not saying it's new here, but I love hearing that you're talking to people, because that's sometimes early when you have a light bulb or a genius idea. Like, how do you validate it? What are the lightest ways that you can get feedback, especially before you build things, is really, really important.
Awesome. Thank you, Sasha. Three super inspiring pitches.
So
Wow.
amazing.
Big
Yes,
thank you
see?
to Muridi, Investable and Remarkable, who are the home a place of all of those three incredible startups. Great to see what's being produced right here, right now, and look forward to following the journey of those organisations. Now, the time has arrived. Questions, hands straight up. I love it. You were first, I saw you straight away. So just say your name, and if you want to, where you're from, and ask away.
Hi, my name's Kim Samuel.
Oh, hold on. We get that one
Yeah.
mic'd up?
It's working?
Yeah,
Yes,
there we go.
I've got a soft voice. My name's Kim Samuel. So amazing talk. Thank you so much. And the presenters, the other presenters. I work for state government, so I work in the social housing sector, and we obviously work on very, very tight budgets, which you might be familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
And all the innovation I've heard tonight has come out of the private sector, and that's a big challenge that we face in government. Due to the bureaucracy and it just seems that the innovation is occurring in the private sector, and I just wonder how government can tap into that. If you've got anything maybe from your time with Hillary. Yeah.
Well, thank you for what you're doing, because I think it's so important that that people choose to work in government and try to create innovation in government. I would just, from my experience in the United States, the most impactful thing I think I've seen happen is a fellowship program called Code for America. It's founded by a woman named Jen Pahlka. She worked in the Obama administration for a while, and her concept was exactly this, which is, and exactly what I've been trying to advocate for tonight, is we need technology people to choose to work in those environments. Or we need technology people to build sets of tools where the customer is the government, like procurement systems. There's a lot of startups in Silicon Valley now about procurement and how you bring transparency and fairness to that environment. And so the concept of Code for America is people from, tech firms like the Googles and Facebooks would apply to do 11 months. There was a curriculum and set of things that groups did together, but then they all went to cities like this person's in Honolulu or Detroit or Cleveland, Ohio, or Austin, Texas, or Las Vegas, and they would be embedded with the city government, and they would choose to solve a point problem like food stamps or access to food stamps, or building a meaningful website where city initiatives were easily searchable and understood. And what I've found over the years I've watched Code for America is that at first the fellowship, once the people disappeared, the technology would also disappear. Like, it wasn't sustainable. Like, it didn't work from day one. And so Code for America tried to change their model and said, how do we pick the best of what's happening for different areas around criminal justice or food stamps or food security and other pieces, and how do we lift that up into a technology platform that's reusable? And so now they have both the fellowship program, but they also have these bigger software initiatives. And those people aren't embedded in the governments, but they're serving local and state governments with their tools. And I know that's just a story, and it's not the only answer, but it's something, if anyone in this government has the power here to pioneer that concept of how do you take the brain trust that's used to working in the for-profit area and try to create moments. I think it's hard for people to say, I'm leaving city government, or I'm leaving traditional tech forever. I think why I was able to convince so many people to join the campaign is it was fixed. That's the same with under Obama. They had this U.S. digital service, which was essentially something between a 6-month or 2-year stint in government, and people thought of it as service, and then I'll go back to this traditional tech world. I'd say 90% of those people don't leave, because once they're in those environments and they see the impact of fixing immigration or healthcare or the State Department, data transparency, or whatever it is, then they don't want to go back to building whatever tool they were doing before. So I would think about things like that. I would think about how to create short-term engagements or fellowships, how to leverage nonprofits or other institutes that are trying to solve the same problem as you. And if nothing else, Jen Pahlka from Code for America would talk to any of you. If you want to learn about this model that's worked in the US, I know she'd be so happy.
All right, we're going here next.
Hi everybody, my name is Carmen Platt and I'm from The Generous and The Grateful, and we're looking at making change in meeting the basic needs of people who are vulnerable to homelessness and reducing the risk of homelessness and self-harm. So you spoke about people not understanding your role and your position and those of the people working for you, and as a creative and ignoramus when it comes to the language of technology, I don't know how to solve that problem because I know I'm naive. So do you have any advice on that? And the second part is about how, when I'm a startup non-profit, which equals zero funding until I raise it, then how do I attract an amazing technologist? And because I don't have any equity to offer them, how do I do that?
So just to make sure I understand your question, you're curious about how you create that credibility or attract technology talent to you. Yeah. I think you're doing the exact right thing, like standing up in this forum.
Yeah.
Hint, hint. I mean, it's true. Like I always say to engineers who want to become product managers, which is sort of my job function, I'm like, go to hackathons. Like, go to hackathons because you can be a not technical participant in a hackathon and you can be the expert in your problem space, like whatever it is, poverty, food security, healthcare, homelessness, like you can be the expert and you're like, I have a problem, because a lot of times engineers go to hackathons because they want to work on an important problem, but they don't have the idea. And so you have to like create those moments of marriage. I know I'm looking at Julie, that's a lot of what incubators do in the community forum. So I think the same way I hustled to create my connections in the community with women engineers in New York, you have to hustle to be like, I need to create a community of technology people, because you never know which conversation, like it's not that person you met at the hackathon, but they're like friend from uni, just his startup went under and he's looking for a new thing, and you can convince him to prototype with you. And I think it's a lower bar to get people to do a project with you or try something with you than to be like, be my co-founder and like get in this long journey together. So I think creating like point projects and figuring out how to inspire people to work with you on a small thing that can turn into a bigger thing.
Great. Front row.
Hi, my name is Heather Hope.
Sorry, wait, Ben's got the mic. Thank you, Ben.
Hi, my name is Heather Hope. I was wondering if you could name one thing that you think that Google could do better to improve the world, one thing from Facebook and one thing from the US government.
Oh my gosh.
That's the multi-trillion-dollar question, I think.
Can we crowdsource? Do other people want to help?
Yeah, tweet your suggestions.
It's a really great question. It's such a great question. I think, gosh, I really want to give a great answer, and I'm approaching like 4 a.m. my time.
Just thinking that. It's definitely close to bedtime.
One thing. Gosh, it's such a big question. I'm gonna think about it. Does anyone have a reaction that they're like, I know the one thing Google should do? Yeah,
Ooh,
let's see what the answers are. Give users back control of their own data. That was a good answer. Do you have an idea of what Google should do? It's a good question.
It is. I think I'm hearing you say you're going to take it on notice.
Well,
I'm
trying to think of which of those three is easier to answer, because I want to at least, first of all, you win for best scarf. So if nothing else, I'm still giving out prizes. Gosh, with the U.S. government, it seems to me there's like, so many things are terrible and hard in technology systems in the U.S. government. So I think there's, to this story of partnership, and there's extreme amounts of money spent on contractors and procurement and entrenched kind of old school ways of doing things. So I think how do you create and attract innovation inside of government is probably a problem that should be solved and feels kind of big, at least in my world. Oh my gosh, the questions about Facebook and Google are so big. I'm going to get your email address, and I'm going to think about it when I've slept.
Yeah.
I know, but it's like Larry and Sergey are going to wake up and they'll be like, in Australia, like Steph Hannon is deciding the future of Google. And they'll probably call me with a job offer.
Yeah, I was going to say, you'll probably get a couple of job offers.
It's a really great question. I'm going to think about it.
All right, to be continued on that one.
Yeah.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
Hi there, my name's Norman Ma. I'd like to ask a question about online communities, of which I think Strava is an excellent example of. I think in the past couple of years, I think we've seen the dangers that online communities like Facebook and Twitter have had in building, groups of people who are quite vitriolic and sometimes violent. What do you think Strava is doing differently to help build more supportive communities, and what lessons do you think can be taken away by people, by anyone working in tech, about how to build a safe online community?
Yeah, I think that's a really important and big question. I think because I've worked on communities at Google and Facebook and at YouTube, a lot of the root of what's important, I think, is the transparency and controls, because and then the policies, like what do we stand for, what's okay on our platform, what's not okay on our platform. That's what I spent a ton of time on Facebook in 2012 when I worked there, because you have to first agree on the policy before you can enforce it. And those were the early days of Facebook groups, but we were constantly trying to make decisions about what kind of like joke groups were okay, like what's an okay joke group and where does it turn into like harassment or discrimination. And so I think the tools are important, but they follow from the policy and being like explicit about your policy and then enforcing your policy. And on the Strava side, I think we're incredibly great. Thank you for saying it. I think we're incredibly great about creating positive environments and positive communities. I think we, in a way, because the nature of all of our communities are around athletics and activity and doing activities together, it's not the place where naturally people would come if they're trying to create a group around something malicious or bad intentioned, if that makes sense. Like, you would choose a lot of other different platforms. So I still think it holds that Strava has a policy on what is okay on our platform, that we create these positive experiences, that we are respectful of our community, that we have tools to report or flag if something's going wrong. Flagging on Facebook is different than, on Strava is different than other tools, because flagging for us is often around activities where people are like, you were not on a bike, you were in a car. Because there's so much competition around the leaderboards. And then we have a flag that's competitive or hazardous segments, because sometimes people say this route should not be competitive because there's danger if people compete there. And so, we have tools in place. I run the community team, manage the community team, and we respond to all the manual reports and requests about that. So I think in that case, it's I'll just keep coming back to it. It's the tools, the controls, and the policy, and enforcing it. And I think Strava, because the nature of why people are there is so positive, that we've been lucky to flourish a lot of positive communities.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, as Steph said, it's getting close to 4 a.m. for her, so we're going to do one more question. Yes, right here.
Hi, my name's Andrea. Congratulations on being the first CTO female for Palmieri. I'm really curious, actually, when was the first time in the campaign you heard or first found out about Cambridge Analytics? And I'd love your thoughts on how it played out, and in that whole world of, well, not a positive question to end on perhaps, but around that sort of, your thoughts around the bad tech element of that within the campaign.
If I'm being honest, I mean, it's just like, it's all a blur. Like, so much was happening, especially with all the Russia stuff. And there were themes of Cambridge Analytica, even with Ted Cruz, like even with the early Republican nominees, were using them as a consulting firm before Trump. So it's impossible for me to say when I first heard of it. I don't think I knew any of the narrative about the potential negative or malicious uses of data, and especially the Facebook API platform, until after it was over. I feel like within days, the story around some of those pieces was very big, and there was like a New York Times article, and a lot of stuff happened right after the campaign, and then it was quiet for a while, and then this year the cycle kind of got really big again. And what I always tell people is, like, I'm not an expert. Like, I didn't know, like, I didn't have visibility into what my equivalent on that campaign was doing. Like, I'm not the target audience. I think it was by reports that other people have said, not me. It was used for significant voter suppression. And we already talked about how voter suppression is real, and it's a big part of the trick. The hard part of an election is getting people to show up at the polls, and I think that's the theme of how the malicious use of that technology platform was, to keep people from showing up at the polls. And so for me, like, again, not having the personal experience with their technology platform and reading a lot in the news and the things everyone here read in the news, of course I'm like disappointed, heartbroken, sad, feeling a lot of feelings because it doesn't feel fair. Like, it feels like there were a lot of reasons why we didn't win the election, but it was by a very small number of votes. You know, we won the popular vote, but not the electoral vote. And so, like, you just have emotions that are big and sort of not good when you keep hearing, like, you keep reliving through these moments what's happening. And I don't think I have any magic story or answer. All I can say is, I think to Holly's question earlier, is like, what can we do now? Like, now knowing that outcome happened, knowing that technology was used in that way, like, how do we look forward and say, in the United States for the 2018 midterms that are coming up in the 2020 elections, like, what's different? How can we try to prevent something like that from happening again? And how are the tools and transparencies and tech companies being held accountable for a different future from what happened in the past?
One sneaky final question, if I can jump in.
Oh, sure.
We've got 200 people in the room here with us tonight. We've got many more joining us on the live stream, all who resonate with this topic, tech for social good. If you could leave them with a call to action, walking out of this room tonight, heading to work tomorrow, thinking about the ideas that are rattling around in their head, what would be the call to action you'd leave them with?
Well, I just think anyone who showed up here tonight and was with us for an hour and 45 minutes is amazing. I just want to congratulate and thank all of you, because if you showed up here, you obviously already care about this and your mindset is already in that space. Maybe my one call to action would be, like, meet 2 people here before you leave, or on the live stream, maybe in the comments of this live
Twitter.
stream. Because it needs to be about a community. Like, you need a community of people who are on a similar quest, who can support you, who can recommend an engineer to you, who can help with your lightweight user research or your testing. Like, I just think communities matter. And now, by virtue of spending an hour and 45 minutes together, like, this group became a community, and we should think really hard about how to, like, flourish it and keep it going as we all go back out into our world and our jobs and our quests.
What a brilliant note to end on. I think we've been absolutely treated tonight, having an hour and 45 minutes with this remarkable woman, the generosity with which you've shared from your own experience, the authenticity, the honesty about some of the hard moments, some of the incredible insight that you're at the forefront of. Can we give her a resounding hand?
Thank you.